Hey everyone, so welcome to this introduction to text signals. Today, just like poor Alice in her maze, we are going to be finding ways to get out of our little dilemmas, our little confusions by using a brand new strategy that builds off of the previous strategies of context clues that we've already learned, and this is called text signals. So today, you're going to learn what text signals are, we're going to notice and identify some examples, and then towards the end of the lesson, you're going to have a chance to go out into the wild and find text signals of your own and use them to be a more active reader and to solve some reading confusions in real life. So let's go ahead and let's get started. Now, the first key understanding that we need to get across for understanding text signals is that there are two kinds of reading styles. The first type of reading is what we call passive reading. And the second type of reading is what we call active reading. And these are very, very different. And you're not born a passive reader and you're not born an active reader. In fact, people kind of go in between these two different states almost on a daily basis. I wake up some days and I feel more of a passive reader, and on others I feel more of an active reader, and vice versa. So what I mean when I say passive reading is a reader who's not feeling very engaged with a text, a reader who doesn't really have a purpose for their reading, they don't have a goal in mind. And a third characteristic of passive reading is that you're not necessarily taking any notes or using any strategies. A good clue for if you are a passive reader is when you get to the end of the page, sometimes you kind of shake your head and you go, whew, what did I just read? I don't remember a single thing. My eyes were going over the page, but was I thinking? Was I interpreting? Was I using my strategies? These are all questions to consider if you might be a passive reader. Being a passive reader can be impacted by things such as the time of day, what you're reading, your experience with that material, and other, hundreds and hundreds of other factors. Now, in contrast, an active reader is kind of the opposite. An active reader is someone who's very engaged with whatever they're reading. They have a clear purpose. They know what they want to understand. They know what their goal is. And when they get stuck, and they do get stuck, they use strategies to try to work through those roadblocks and to clarify them. Now, the second key understanding that goes along with the first is that one habit of an active reader is noticing what we're going to call text signals today. So a signal is a word for something that gives you information or direction. When you flip on your turn signal in your car, that tells people that you're turning right or left. Similarly, a signal in a reading or a text is meant to give the reader some sort of information or direction. Maybe it's a clue about how the paragraph is going to be organized or the way that a sentence is meant to be interpreted. Now, if that sounds a little bit like context clues, it is. A signal or a text signal is a specific kind of context clue. And that's why we're giving this text signal video after our context clues video, because we're taking that general skill of noticing context and we're getting even more targeted in noticing things like signals. Now, signals usually take three different forms, and we're going to take a look at each of these three today in this video. The first way a text signal might arise is through clue words. These might be transition words, or they might be even phrases that kind of tie a sentence in a particular structure. The second is punctuation. Things like dashes, commas, periods, and other punctuation marks can be huge signals that give a lot of information and direction to the reader. And the third is even larger, it's paragraph structure. And this is words or phrases, or even punctuation or a combination, they give you a larger sense of how a paragraph is organized. And we're going to look at some examples that really make that clear. So let's go ahead and let's take a quick look at the three examples that we just discussed. So for today's examples, we're going to take a look at a few sentences from this week's text titled How to Mark a Book by Mortimer Adler. In your packets, you can find these examples on page 94. So please pause to take out this page so that you can take notes along with me. Now, this sentence, which is right here, can also be found on the first page of your text. It's in paragraph 2. And so as you read your text later on today, you'll probably come across this sentence more than once. Now the sentence is a bit of a tricky one. It says, I contend, comma, quite bluntly, comma, that marking up a book is not an act of mutilation, but of love. So take a moment to silently reread that sentence to yourself and try to understand the main idea inside of it. Now, we're going to apply our first kind of text signal, which is looking for clue words. Clue words are also sometimes referred to as signal words because, again, they're a text signal that give the reader information or direction. As you look at this sentence, do you notice any words that give you information or direction? Give a special bit of attention to any words that shift the sentence or the meaning of the sentence in a particular way. Now, there are a number of words in this sentence that carry meaning, but I want to highlight two particular words that work together to be a kind of signal. And those words are the words not and but. Now, you might be wondering why I chose those words. Well, let's talk about it. Sometimes words work together as a pair or a team. In this case, the author is saying, I contend, quite bluntly, that marking up a book, so he's talking about annotating, which we've determined is the focus of this reading. He says that marking up a book is not this, but this. And so the words not and but are working together in a particular way. Let's look at another example of a sentence that uses the same structure. In this sentence, he says, that's not a handful of peanuts, but of almonds. That's not a handful of peanuts, but of almonds. Notice how the words not and but work together. Now, what are they trying to communicate? In this case, the sentence is starting by saying what you might think is in that hand, a handful of peanuts, and the second is what is actually in that hand. It's a handful of almonds. So it's showing a contrast or a difference between two things. So from this, we get the idea that when you see the word not, dot, 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 followed by the word but, dot, 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 that maybe that's used for contrasts or showing differences. Now, why is this important to this sentence? Well, it just so happens that I don't know what the word mutilation means. I know that we're talking about marking up a book, and I do know the word love. So let me go ahead and use the signal words as a clue that I might be thinking about two things that are different. It's not this, but it's that instead. So if I notice here that he uses the word love, love is a very positive word. So if not and but separate two things that are different, I might predict that mutilation is some sort of negative word. So from that, let's take a look at that sentence again. He says, marking up a book is not a bad thing, but it's a good thing. It's something to do with love. It shows love. Marking up a book shows love, not mutilation. So I was able to do that and solve that using signal words. Mutilation, for me, what's the opposite of love? How about hate or hurt? Overall, the gist of this sentence appears to be that taking notes shows you love. I'm going to make a prediction, maybe shows you love your book. not hate it. Now, there are still parts of this sentence that I have not yet been able to solve. And so for this next portion, we're going to take a look at our second kind of clue, which is punctuation. For this, we're going to look at the front end of the sentence. Notice how in this sentence, there are two pieces of punctuation early in the sentence. They are commas. Now, as those of you may know, commas are pauses. They're meant to pause the reader. So look at how this sentence is chunked or broken up. The sentence is going, and then it stops, and then it keeps going here. So it's almost as if the author was stopping in the middle of his sentence to add an additional thought or detail. Now, why would he do that? Why stop the flow? When you look at the phrase that's separated by the commas, many times it will be describing some additional information to the part before the commas. In this case, he says, I contend, which means I believe. Okay? Now, he's pausing to say quite bluntly. Bluntly is a word that means he believes it very strongly. So he stopped his sentence in the middle to say, I believe very strongly, I believe very strongly that marking up a book shows you love it, not hate it, right? So overall, this punctuation shows he feels strongly. Because he took time out of his day to stop his sentence in the middle to add this additional detail. In that way, you can use punctuation and chunking to see which parts of the sentence connect to parts either earlier or sometimes later from the part that is being broken off with punctuation. Now, for our last example, we're going to be turning to paragraph 4, which can be found on page 97. So let's turn to page 97 and look at this final example. Now this example, I really like this one. And if I were to talk about my favorite kind of text signal, it would probably be paragraph structure. So I'm going to write paragraph structure across the top. Go ahead and write that too. Paragraph structure. Now, if you know anything about structure, think of a house and how it has a structure underneath. The word structure means how something is built, right? Construction comes from the word structure. So you think about a house, it's got beams underneath, it's got a foundation, right? And when you're talking about structure, you're talking about how it is built. Now, paragraphs are very similar to houses. They usually have some sort of flow or structure inside. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at this paragraph, which comes from Mortimer Adler's text. And I want you to notice, is there any structure? How is it built? How is it built and organized? Okay, so pause this video, and I just want you to take maybe 2 or 3 minutes to read this paragraph and make predictions about how you see it being organized. Now for me, one of the things that jumps out immediately in the beginning is the word, there are 2 ways. When I see numbers, my heart kind of jumps inside of me because I'm thinking, I wonder if this paragraph is going to discuss the 2 ways in which you can own a book. Now, how will I know if this is true? Well, let me look for more clues. I see the first is the property right. Aha, aha, aha. So I'm noticing that the paragraph appears to be going into the first way in which you can own a book. Now let me scan. Can you find the other transition word that gives a hint at the other way you can own a book? Now, I bet a lot of you were looking for the word second, but you actually wouldn't find the word second in here. So you have to look a little bit more closely for the structure inside of this paragraph. The author writes, the first is the property right you establish by paying for it, just as you pay for clothes or furniture. And then notice here, the paragraph shifts and it says the word but this act of purchase, which was just what we were discussing, right? He's talking about one way you can own a book is by buying it. He says, but this act of purchase is only the prelude to possession. Full ownership, again, we're talking about how to own a book. Full ownership comes only when, let me pause right there. Full ownership comes only when ... Whatever happens here, what do we know? We know that it's the second way you can own a book. So let me color code this to be a little bit clearer. You don't have to do this, but I just want to show you. So it seems as though Mortimer Adler thinks by writing in a book, this is the second way to own it. Now, do I take all of these notes every paragraph I read? No. But do my eyes go and dance between these details, and do they notice the structure inside of a paragraph? Yes, of course. Look as we zoom out at this paragraph, how it very clearly has a structure inside of it. First, it starts by establishing that there are two ways you can own a book. Then it describes the first way. And then it draws a contrast by saying the word but, and then it describes the second way. And the word but shows you that these two are very different ways to own a book.